Hi, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about the first chapter in the book, which is a very short chapter, so I might not even use up the whole 15 minutes. It's the chapter about an introduction to agricultural economics. So, first of all, let's talk about what is economics. We're going to skip this slide, go to the next one. Really, economics is about overcoming scarcity. And you can have different types of resources. Resources are also known as inputs in economics. Different types of resources that are scarce. You can have natural and biological resources, human resources, or manufactured resources. So natural and biological resources could be things like land, mineral deposits, or water in California. We talked about that earlier in a discussion last week. A lot of you mentioned that as a big concern for California. You also mentioned another resource that can be scarce in California, and that's labor. We talked about the fact that we have serious labor issues in agriculture, supply and demand. Demand is outstripping supply, so that has big concerns for many farmers. And then manufactured resources are things like capital, equipment, buildings, um, things like livestock are also in that category. So anyway, so the theory of economics has to do with overcoming scarcity. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So what people do when things are scarce is they make choices. So when we talk about economics, we talk about the theory of overcoming scarcity and making choices. And one of the things that can be scarce are resources, like we just talked about. Um, Another thing that we can talk about in beginning economics is the concept of opportunity costs, and this has to do with making choices. So opportunity costs are the costs of opportunities foregone. Opportunity costs are the costs that you give up when you make a choice, and we're going to have a little slide on that a little bit later, so I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Another choice we talk about in agriculture is the choice to specialize or to diversify. And we talked about the idea of comparative advantage last week when we talked about California agriculture. So you kind of know that what comparative advantage is. California has a comparative advantage in agriculture because of its location on the Pacific Rim, because of its Mediterranean climate. Another factor in making choices could be consumer decisions to overcome scarcity. So consumers will always choose to spend their money to get the best deal, I guess you could say. And then another aspect of making choices has to do with societal decisions. And that has to do with how we allocate resources like the Farm Bill, how much, funding farmers get from the Farm Bill. Or maybe right now it has to do with the border wall. That is a huge issue that seems to be in the news a lot lately. So the first thing I want to talk about is opportunity costs. We talked about that a little bit, but there's a good slide here. So opportunity costs are the costs of opportunities foregone. So it's the cost implied with the next best choice. And in the Central Valley, let's not talk about Texas A&M, but let's talk about the Central Valley. So if you're farming in California, where we live in Stanislaus County, you could choose to plant almonds, grapes, peaches, alfalfa, lots of different things. And your opportunity cost would be the cost of what you gave up. So if you decide to grow almonds, then the next best alternative might be to grow walnuts or grapes or alfalfa. So opportunity costs are the costs of opportunities foregone. Very important in economics. You're going to see a little example here in a second. Okay, so this is a good example of opportunity costs. And this is actually, you're going to have a little problem like this in your assignment this week where you get to do some calculations. So I know you can read as well as I can. So you can look at these three options. You can have the family is the Stinsons, not the Simpsons. You can grow cotton, which will yield 500 pounds an acre, and you get 96 cents a pound, and your production expenses are $285 an acre. So you could figure out how much profit you can make, right? 500 times 96 cents a pound is going to give you revenue, money coming in, and your expenses are $285 an acre. Or you could grow wheat, and wheat you would get 50 bushels an acre. You sell the wheat for $7.25 per bushel. That BU means bushel. And your production expenses are a little bit lower than for cotton, only $210 an acre. So you'd have to figure out your profit there. Or you could just lease out your ground, and you would receive $200 an acre, and your expenses would be $40 an acre. So which option would you choose? Well, you would choose the most profitable one, and your opportunity cost would be the second most profitable one. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that they calculated everything out for you, and you can see that the most profitable option would be the option to grow cotton, because you would profit $195 per acre. Option 2, which was wheat, you would profit $152.50 an acre. And then option 3, you would profit only $160 an acre, which is actually more than wheat. So that is the concept of opportunity costs. Okay, so the idea of specialization goes to the law of comparative advantage, and they're going to give you an example, kind of a silly example, but it basically shows that no one is completely self-sufficient, and we all rely on other states or countries for the products that we need to purchase. So here's an example of Kansas. Kansas has a surplus of wheat, a shortage of potatoes, and a shortage of oranges. And then if we move on to Idaho has too many potatoes, but a shortage of wheat and a shortage of oranges. So you can start to imagine if Idaho specializes in potatoes and Kansas specializes in wheat, what do you think the next state is going to be? Aha, it's Florida. And Florida has a surplus of oranges. So if we put all of these 3 states together, and we can see that if you specialize and produce what you're good at, then everyone benefits, because Kansas grows more wheat than they can use, so they can trade for the things that they want, which would be oranges and potatoes. Idaho has too many potatoes, so they could trade for wheat and oranges. Florida has a surplus of oranges, so they can trade for wheat and potatoes. So that is kind of the law of comparative advantage, and the idea of specializing in what you're good at, produce what you're good at, and trade for the rest. Okay, so you can see the rest of the slides as we go through them. Pretty easy concept, I think. Okay, so if we look at a couple terms, really these are terms that are introduced here. Macro versus microeconomics. Microeconomics is studying individuals or groups of individuals. Since it's agricultural economics, microeconomics looks at individual farming operations, their profitability, how you make decisions for individual production systems. Macroeconomics looks at the economy as a whole. It looks at unemployment figures, it looks at housing starts, all the things that affect the economy. So macroeconomics looks at the big picture of the economy. The term fallacy of composition, basically that which is true in an individual situation is not necessarily true in the aggregate. I was thinking of a good example for this. I think your book also gives you a couple examples. So just because I like M&Ms, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone likes to consume M&Ms. I don't know. Positive and normative economics, you can read that. Positive economics is what currently is, or what would happen if. And normative economics basically says this is what should happen. If we raise interest rates, then that should slow the economy down. That's normative economics. Alternative economic systems, capitalism, free enterprise, market-driven system. Socialism and communism have more government intervention. Socialism is more moderate, communism is more extreme. Remember, the US has a mixed economic system. We basically think of ourselves as a capitalistic economy, but the government is involved with things like supporting farm operations, overseeing, like the EPA oversees environmental aspects of agriculture. So the government is involved, but not to the extreme of communism. I thought this is a nice saying. You can read it. I can read it to you. It says, the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. And that was Winston Churchill. This one is a comment that your book came up with, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Definitely new for the edition of the book. It says, Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers broadcasting legend, now in his 67th and final year, recently offered the following assessment of socialism. Socialism, failing to work as it always does, this time in Venezuela. You talk about giving everybody something free, and all of a sudden there's no food to eat. And who do you think is the richest person in Venezuela? The daughter of Hugo Chavez. Hello. Anyway, 0-2. So I think that's kind of interesting because Venezuela's in the news right now, if you watch the news. So the definition of economics. The economics is a social science, not a biological or a physical science. It deals with how consumers make choices to overcome scarce resources. I said the short version. A social science that deals with how consumers make choices to overcome scarcity. And that's what we already talked about a little bit. So when we talk about agricultural economics is an applied social science that deals with how producers and consumers in societies use scarce resources to produce food and fiber. You can read just as easy as I can. So just remember that agricultural economics is unique. It has its own branch of study, which is kind of special. Agriculture is a primary industry, meaning that it's basic to human needs and all other industries are built upon it. Plentiful food supplies allow societies to spend time developing the arts, like music, mathematics, and philosophy. Made that up myself. Okay, real quick here, we're going to talk about the reason why agricultural economics is unique. Two things. You're going to remember these because they're going to come into play later on. They're on your midterm. Two factors make agricultural economics unique. Production cycles, which are physical factors that affect the production of crops. The biggest thing you can remember as far as production cycles making agricultural economics unique is that we have drought, flood, frost, weather factors that influence production in agriculture. And they don't influence production in any other type of business, but agriculture is highly influenced by the weather. So that makes agriculture unique, and in turn that makes agricultural economics unique. Price instability goes with a production cycle. So price instability is true for agriculture more so than just about any other type of production. So we can never predict prices in agriculture because we never know what the weather is going to be. So prices fluctuate, and they fluctuate not just because of weather, but they also fluctuate because different countries have, problems in producing a crop. If China has a crop failure, if China's walnut crop is a failure, that is a boon to American California farmers because they will buy walnuts from California. So it's very difficult to predict prices, and that makes agriculture very risky. And that is part of the reason why corporate investment in agriculture is not a great risk to the family farm, because prices in agriculture constantly fluctuate. Okay, moving right along. This is just a little, career booster for you. So if you like agricultural economics, and you really love doing those graphs from last week, you get more this week. What an economist does is looks at production decision making, overcoming scarcity, and all those type of aspects. And you know what? I am just about out of time. Let me see. Is there any more? Oh, nope. This is it. Important websites. You can check those out. Okay. Thanks. Good luck this week. See you next week.